There's a reason our grandparents' gardens produced food that tasted richer, stored longer, and grew stronger than much of what we see today. They didn't have access to synthetic fertilizers or endless seed catalogs. Instead, they relied on hardy crops that were sown in rhythm with the seasons. October, often overlooked by today's gardeners, was one of their busiest planting months. While many now see it as a time to wind down, past generations knew that planting certain crops during this window not only guaranteed food through winter, but also set the soil up for health the following spring. This is knowledge worth keeping alive, and when applied today, it can still outperform modern methods. Why October sowing gave gardens an edge. The secret to October planting lies in the soil and climate. Cooler temperatures slow down pests and diseases, while soil moisture tends to hold better after the heat of summer. These conditions allowed crops to establish strong root systems without stress, and in turn, the soil benefited from continuous cover. Garden beds weren't left bare to erode or compact. They stayed alive with plants that worked both as food for the family and as natural soil conditioners. The balance between feeding people and feeding the ground made these gardens self-sustaining, a principle that many modern plots could relearn. Garlic was planted for strength and soil healing. One of the most trusted October crops was garlic. Grandmothers saved the biggest cloves from the summer harvest, pressing them deep into loosened soil. Planted in fall, garlic had months to settle before bursting forth in spring, producing bulbs that outlasted almost any store-bought variety. The act of planting garlic wasn't just for food. It also deterred pests below the soil and left behind sulfur compounds that benefited neighboring crops. A practical way to replicate this today is to plant garlic 4 inches deep and 6 inches apart in rich, mulched beds. Broad beans built fertility while feeding families. Another October staple was the broad bean. While it offered fresh pods and dry beans later, its real value came from nitrogen-fixing roots. As the plants grew through cool months, they anchored the soil and pulled nitrogen from the air into nodules underground. Once cut down in spring, those nodules broke down, releasing fertility for the next crop. Today, broad beans can still serve double duty. Sow them in rows with 8 inches between seeds, then chop the plants at flowering to feed the soil before planting summer vegetables. Brassicas provided winter resilience. Cabbage, kale, and collards were never absent from an October garden. These leafy greens thrived in cool air and, became sweeter with frost. They also offered food security, as a single cabbage head could feed a family for days and store for weeks in a root cellar. More importantly, their strong root systems loosened heavy soils over winter. For modern gardeners, starting brassicas in October gives a steady harvest into late winter, while breaking up compacted ground naturally, sparing the need for constant digging. Root crops preserved food through cold months. Carrots, turnips, and beets were another set of crops that grandmothers trusted. Sown in October, they developed slowly, storing sugars and starches that made them both flavorful and long-lasting. Many were left in the ground and harvested as needed, essentially creating a living pantry under the soil. The trick was to mulch them heavily once frosts arrived, keeping the soil soft enough to pull roots even in freezing weather. Applying this today means a gardener can extend harvest windows without relying on cold storage. Onions set in the fall grew larger than those planted in the spring. Grandmothers often set onion bulbs in October rather than waiting for spring. This gave onions a bit of a head start, allowing their roots to establish before the soil cooled completely. By the time spring arrived, these onions shot up quickly, often outpacing spring-planted sets in both size and durability. If repeated today, gardeners can plant onion sets about 2 inches deep and mulch them to protect from frost heaving. The reward, really, is an earlier and often stronger harvest. Rye and clover protected the soil while also restoring it. Not every October planting was about putting food on the table, you see. Many older gardens included cover crops like rye and clover. These weren't eaten, but were used as living blankets over the soil. Rye rooted deep into clay, breaking it apart, while clover added nitrogen. When cut down in spring, they became mulch or green manure. This cycle reduced the need for outside fertilizer and kept the soil biologically active. Gardeners today can use the same method. Just broadcast rye or clover seed at a rate of about 1 pound per 100 square feet and let them grow until spring termination. Why do these crops still outperform modern shortcuts? Well, the strength of these October crops lies in their balance. They provided food security while directly building soil health. Unlike many modern varieties bred for uniformity and speed, these older plantings were chosen for resilience, longevity, and their contribution to the ecosystem of the garden. By copying the wisdom of grandmothers, sowing garlic, beans, brassicas, roots, onions, and cover crops in October, a garden can still outperform one that relies only on store-bought inputs and spring-only sowing. Our grandparents weren't just planting food, they were planting security, fertility, and resilience into their soil every October. By reviving these crops and methods today, we can achieve stronger yields, healthier soil, and gardens that sustain themselves season after season. If you found this guide useful and want more time-tested strategies for your own beds, make sure to subscribe to Soil Doctor and share this video with fellow gardeners. The old ways, honestly, still hold the keys to thriving gardens today.